What we're going to do is think about what we do here at the church. And some of you may remember this. We actually did a whole sermon series around this idea a few years back. I can't remember how long ago, at least 5. And it uses sort of 3 concentric circles to think about how we engage with people. And as we move through these circles, there's a couple of things that I want you to notice. One, it's really based in relationship with people when we serve them, and how close we are in proximity with those that we're serving. Some of the things we might also consider is that in some of these circles, there's different sort of power dynamics that we have to be aware of when we are serving people. And also, as we move in these circles, what it demands of you. And so we're going to kind of work our way inward in these circles, and we're going to use 3 words this morning. Empower, engage, and incarnate. Empower, engage, and incarnate. So when we think about what we're talking about when we're talking about empowerment, this is what we see often in many churches, a lot of the work that we do. Empower is just simply when we help people who help people. When we give of our resources to someone else and say, go serve the community. When we raise money and give that to someone else. When we get gifts and we give that to someone else. You get the picture. When we are in this circle of empowerment, we are trying to serve our community by helping those who are serving community do it well. So we support KCM. We support Clothed by Faith. We support fill in the blank of another organization. And your limitation when we are doing this is really just resources. If we all had Elon Musk money, we could give all our money away and do some real good in this world. But we don't. And so we're just limited by our resource and our willingness to give in this realm. And you can think of probably many organizations from this church to other organizations or groups that we ask of you to come and bring something that you are part of giving money to or resources to. The funny thing is, if you look in Scripture, there's not a ton of examples of this. Though I would guess for most of us, this is probably one of the main ways that we serve our community. To give you a couple of examples, there's a woman by the name of Phoebe in Romans. And you may not be familiar with Phoebe because she's just mentioned real briefly for a hot second in Romans. But right at the end of Paul's letter in Romans, he says, I commend to you our sister Phoebe, a deacon of the church, so you may welcome her in the Lord as fitting to for the saints, and help her in whatever she may require from you, for she has been a benefactor of many and of myself as well. And what Paul's referring to is, in first century world, it's very common for people like Paul to have patrons, people who paid for his work. We know he was a tent maker, so he supported himself a little bit, but he did this. Jesus probably had people in his life that actually paid the bills to help him go do what Jesus did. It's just common work. So if you think of someone like Phoebe, you may know her name if you remembered this one singular moment. But think about the impact of Phoebe. Paul probably would have had someone else that supported him. But think of what Phoebe did. By giving her time and resources, she empowered someone like Paul. And because of what Paul did, the reverberations went for ages and ages. We need Phoebes. We need people who can empower other people who do great work. And in many ways, we all get the chance, of course, to be a Phoebe, to help someone else go do great work in this world. Paul himself did this kind of thing, and this is probably very similar to what many of us think about when we think about the sort of empowerment work that we do in church. Paul went around. In fact, you could say a lot of Paul's letters are secretly fundraising letters. Because what Paul is trying to do is establish some ground with them so that he can receive some money from them, so he can send that money back to Jerusalem and they can feed the people who are in the midst of a famine. So he can go support the food bank in Jerusalem. And he's doing that because he thinks it's one way to tie this building church together. But Paul's asking them, give me some money, I'll hand it to the other people, and they'll go do this work. And so by doing this, he made people in area of Turkey feel like they had a connection to people in Jerusalem who they would never, ever meet. But because they gave some money, they helped them go do something. So there's maybe a few more, but honestly, we don't see a lot of empowerment work, though, of course, it happened. And in churches today, you might think that's a big way that we often do that. Whether that's through our communion rails, whether that's through your Sunday schools, whether that's through some food drives and things that we do. So when we think about this sort of circle of empowerment, just some questions, and I know that's maybe hard to read. I'll read them for you if you can't. How do we empower organizations and people that are doing good? Because the church can't and shouldn't try to tackle every need. How are they, those organizations, doing something that we can't? Are they utilizing our resources well? Do the things we support align with our values? Are we matched up with like-minded folks? Are we generous and flexible and intentional with what we do? How has it changed others, and how is it changing us? These are all some questions that I think are helpful when we're thinking about where are we sending our resources and our time and our money? And y'all probably are already thinking these questions often yourselves. But to give you a big bird's eye view of what we do here at Katy First, now that's even smaller text, but you have some of these on your table. There's about 4, so you'll have to share them. This is sort of an impact report of Katy First. This is particularly from 2024, so just looking back to last year. But you can see, and especially because you see the finished product, there's a lot here. There's more than there's going to be in the other circles. So we give money to KCM, whether that's through Thanksgiving supplies, school supplies, whether that's through offering rails or through our budgeted money. Christ Clinic, we give money to. Clothed by Faith, we give money to. We do drives for them. We're about to do our Sleep in Heavenly Peace, which takes money and takes volunteer hours. Our school partnerships, you can think of that. So you can see school partnerships, pumpkin patch, Christmas gifts, Thanksgiving feast. Fam Houston, Jenny Griggs, when I was out on paternity leave, she came and preached, and maybe you heard more about Fam Houston, their work with refugees, and a little bit of partnership we have with them. Peace Catalyst, a group who works overseas. Brian and Stephanie Carey have been with our church a few times and taught us about peacemaking. Amazing place who works here in our community. You can think about disaster relief and Red Cross when we sheltered folks. You can think about our UMW and the money they give out, organizations they give it to. You can think of some of our Sunday school classes like Living Word and Rejoice. Y'all receive money. You give that out into organizations. You can think of our M&M fundraiser, all of our communion rails and the different organizations that we give through there, and then even our campus partnerships. So there's a lot. And once you see all this, it's like this big, massive picture of a whole lot of activity, a whole lot of different groups that we're saying we want to help and we want to empower. And again, really, we're limited by resources. We're limited by our willingness. Do we want to work with this group? Are we going to work with this group? So in this sort of big circle, I think this is sort of step 1. Who are we helping who are helping other people? And how are we empowering them in this work? So I'm going to give you just a little bit of time to process this circle with a few questions with your leaders there at your table. And then we'll maybe do a little bit of sharing. So leaders, or group leaders, I'm going to turn it to y'all to do some questions and discussion. All right. Let's go to the next circle in, and I could hear some of y'all sort of jumping ahead a little bit, not necessarily on purpose, but from empower to engage. And I'm going to give you some examples to help sort of differentiate all these. But the big difference between empowering is I give you money, or do I show up at your doors and serve alongside the very population that you're trying to serve? So let's take KCM, for example, because you'll notice KCM is listed in both of those. Empowerment work is when we do a food drive. Engagement work is when you go to the food bank and you hand those groceries to someone and you have a conversation with them and you're in relationship with them. And so as I was telling you, this is really just sort of a relationally driven way of looking at it. How close in proximity are you to people and how far away are you to people? And so I'll walk through some of these, but that's the major difference between an empowerment and an engagement opportunity, where we are in relationship. We are one-on-one with people. We don't help people. We join into the work of helping people. So let me go up into my notes here. So, you think about, of course, the limitations, y'all know about this. Your limitations when you get into this are not just, do you have enough money? It's, do you have time? Can I show up to that Build-A-Bed event? Can I go into the school and mentor? Do I have the relational capacity for this particular thing? Do I have the energy for this particular thing? So you begin to have different limitations here. But as it demands more of us, and so many of you would attest to this, and you already said it over here, as it demands more of us, so too do those engagement spaces tend to be more fulfilling, we might say transformative, spaces where you're disconnected when you give someone food for a food bank. When you see a family that needs food, you hear their story, help them get that. That begins to shift and change something in you and in your heart and in your soul. So engagement is really any of those spaces where we are taking one step inward with any of these organizations that we might be supporting, or other ones that it's not about giving them something, it's about showing up there with them. The classic story I think about here is the Good Samaritan story, right? Because remember the Good Samaritan story. There's someone beat up, naked, and left on the side of the road. Two people walk by and they don't want to engage. We can give our interpretive lens on why they don't engage. But then here along comes the Good Samaritan. And we all probably are honestly faced with very similar situations in our own community for folks that may be on the side of the road. And why don't you engage? Why wouldn't the Good Samaritan engage? Well, because it's going to take a lot of time to do that. And it's going to take his money and his resources, right? When he goes over to the Good Samaritan, it says he came to where he was and he was moved with compassion. His innards where we felt something. So he didn't just feel it and go, man, I wish that somebody would come help him. He engaged with them. And in doing that, he bandaged up his wounds. Then he took him to the hotel or the hospital. He paid for his bills, made sure he was okay. Then he went on his way. And that's really that's the hardship in engagement for any of us that we're all very aware of. It's going to demand something from you. It's a lot easier to give our money to a lot of different people. It's a lot more than when we have to give some of ourself and engage with folks. So just some clarifying questions that you might process through. Where or with whom can I connect my passions and gifts with the things that matter most? Because you can't do everything. So if I'm going to go volunteer somewhere, am I doing it in not just any place, but the place that matches what I'm gifted at and where I can go? Is there an opportunity to engage personally with an organization that I support financially? I've always given money to this group. At first, giving money and giving gifts was great. That just feels like rote activity now. So maybe the more transformative step is, let's see if I can go engage with them. Look where you already support and step in closer. And what obstacles are keeping me from saying yes, where God may be asking me to engage personally, like the Good Samaritan. Maybe it's fear, a sense of insecurity. Maybe it's something real, like your time. So when I look at our Empower and Engage circles then, so we had sleep in heavenly peace listed on here twice. Sleep in heavenly peace in two ways is sort of what I would call an empowerment opportunity. One, when we pay money to build the thing, we're empowering it. And to a degree, when you show up on September 13th at 9 a.m. in the morning, right, bud? All of us. And we go and build. I think that's really an empowerment work. Because you are still separated from the people that are going to be receiving these beds. So we're still helping Sleep in Heavenly Peace go do what they're really doing, which is providing beds for kids. So it's empowerment work, because you're separated. But one of those volunteer opportunities, which we need more of, right, bud, is people to go deliver those beds. Now, when you go deliver that bed, you're going to walk into a room, and you're going to meet a kid, and you're going to see they've been sleeping here, but now I'm going to construct this bed for them, and I'm going to get to hear their story. I'm going to get to see the joy on their face. That's empowerment, or that's engagement, right? So that's why it's listed on here twice, because you're engaging with them. We've already used the KCM example. I give to the food bank, I show up at the food bank. Take our schools, for example. We encourage teachers. We might bring food to go into their, but then when you go serve in a school and mentor a kid, you're engaging with that school. You're hands-on. So you can kind of hopefully see how these, so you got Sleep in Heavenly Peace, you got school partnerships, Pumpkin Patch. I would consider our trunk or treat an engagement space because we're right there with families. It's maybe a little bit less so, but you're one-on-one with them. You're getting to be there with them. You're getting to offer a space for our community. We don't put that on for ourselves, trunk or treat. We put that on for the community. We create a space. They show up on our campus. We get to serve them. Hope Impact, some of you we already talked about. You might go serve dinner. You may go to Ballard House. Barry, he goes sings at Carriage Inn. He's offering something where he's hymn singing with folks. And then you could think of any of our UM Army, Junior High Bridge, choir tour, or the Rocky Mountain Retreat that we had this last year. All these are what we might call engagement spaces that we've had in the church that we offer. So I want to kind of differentiate between those two. Now, you can kind of see a little bit of a difference here. So I'm going to turn it back to y'all again, get into a little time of discussion here, and talk about the difference of these, the power of them, and what limitations we may have in them. So go back to y'all. Go to your tables. We're going to get to the last one and then get to our break. This is the one, I'll be honest, is sort of hardest to articulate. And I hope I'll give you some examples, and I hope you'll kind of catch. So far, and I mentioned this early on, when you think of what we're talking about in mission community engagement, the reality is there's always going to be a power dynamic, to a degree. You have what someone else needs, whether that's a resource, a time, a talent, something. And there's always going to be a power dynamic when we go and serve into our community, and that's a reality. This last circle, what I want to get to is the space where that begins to go away. In the language of our scriptures, the sort of Bible-y language, it's the language of incarnation. And of course, we talk about this a lot. But if the first is I'm going to help someone else who's going to help someone else, that's engage, that's empower. Engagements, I'm going to help someone else. And this, we would change the language to I'm going to be with one another, where we share in mutuality. Where there's you got a need, I've got a need, we're lifting each other up. Of course, scripture-wise, that all comes back to what we say of the Word made flesh, of moving into the neighborhood amongst us, what it meant for God to become flesh in Christ and to share in our world, not just sit back from it, but to embody it literally with us and walk amongst us, to have 12 disciples that he shared concerns about, to know what it is to need food and hunger and shelter. Another version of this might be what you sometimes read as sort of this like incredibly high bar of community that Paul talks about. And I think that high bar of community is what we might call an incarnational way of being with one another. So let me read a little bit out of Romans, chapter 12, verses 3 through 21. Paul says, "For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think of yourselves more highly than you ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. For as in one body we have many members, and not all the members have the same function, so we, who are many, are one body in Christ, and individually we are members of one another. We have gifts that differ according to the grace given to us, prophecy in proportion to faith, ministry and ministering, the teacher in teaching, the encourager in encouragement, the giver in sincerity, the leader in diligence, the compassionate in cheerfulness. Let love be genuine, hate what is evil, hold fast to what is good. Love one another with mutual affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not lag in zeal, but be ardent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in affliction. Persevere in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints. Pursue hospitality to strangers. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be arrogant, but associate with the holy. Do not claim to be wiser than you are. Do not pay evil for evil, but take for what is noble in the sight of all. If it is possible, so far as depends on you, live peaceably with all." How many of us do that? I mean, I'm like tired just reading that thing, right? Like, okay, Paul, that sounds exhausting to try to live that. And to some degree, I would say, what we could say about, as much as we might wish we could do that with everyone, do we do it with anyone, right? Is there anyone that we have that sort of shared life with, that there is a mutuality in giving, there's humility, there's a love, there is all the stuff that he just talked about. And so it's to that degree, when I think of sort of incarnation, just the one big question is, who is around me that I share my life with in mutual service? Who are the people in my circle? And the reason I don't list anything here, to a certain degree, you could say any ministry in this church, we would list there. Because sometimes you're serving and sometimes you're receiving that service. What is a church but a place where people of all ages, nation, races, economic statuses, abilities, all the things that we name, are standing on a level ground. And we say, no one is greater than the other person. And we try at our best to create a community where what Paul talked about is a reality. And do we have a people that we can do that with? So when I think of the incarnational space, that's sort of what I think about. And let me give you just a few examples then of how I think some of the things we've already named could sort of progress in a differentiation. So if you have KCM, for example, and this one was a little bit hard, but you give to a food bank, then you volunteer at a food bank and you interact with families, so you've empowered, engaged. What would be incarnational with KCM, where it becomes you with these families? Maybe it looks like you then become on staff with that organization, so it becomes your concerns, it becomes you're not just supporting people, it is who you are. An even more extreme example would be you move in the neighborhood, the families that they're living with, and they become your neighbors and not just people who show up at the doors. Our school partnerships, we bring supplies to teachers, empower. We mentor in the schools, that's one of many ways you engage. An incarnational lens says, I begin to see the school and the children that attend that school as a place where I build community with fellow families. We're one together. A mission trip. We give money. We ask you to give money to M&M fundraiser, supports our mission trips. Engage. I go with Danielle on UM Army because she told me to go, and I build a ramp for a family. What's the incarnational space? How many of you were here when More Blessing told us about UMR me this year. And if you remember, there was a certain point in her very good report where she talked about the lady that they were serving and how they kind of began to build this relationship, and she wanted to offer something. If you go on mission trips, you often find this. You go build a house for someone, they want to give you lunch. They want to give you ice cream, and you receive that. Now, there's a power dynamic. I'm building you something. I'm doing something for you. In that space, that's when the walls begin to dissolve. No longer am I just offering you something. I'm eating a meal with you, and we're fellow human beings. I'm still building you a ramp. But now you've begun to enter into what I think is the incarnational space, where in that family, and you heard it in More Blessings' report, that was the thing that moved her the most that week, when that family became someone they knew. So as I said, I think if we look at all this, it helps us see there's a lot we can do. But as we move in closer, and as you get closer into relationship with people, it's also true that these spaces are more vulnerable and more transformative too. And so that's what I'm trying to tap into here. I'll give you one last example. And this is kind of based on a church I worked at in Atlanta. Our FAM Houston works in Houston with refugee families. So this is an example. So we give money to FAM Houston. If you were to engage with them, you might go. They have a community garden. You can work with the fellow refugee families who garden in there, build some relationships. Now you're engaging with them. The last step would be, what if we moved in that apartment complex with those families, and we began to live life with them? A church I was in Atlanta, that was what they did. If they had an impact report, it would probably look like we give money, and then we host community dinners, and then a few of us live in that neighborhood. And it probably wouldn't have a lot of things on it. But that's because they've sort of focused in on that's like their one thing that they do. And so you can kind of see, even as a church, it may demand of us and ask us, is there somewhere deeper we could commit as a church to be in ministry with people and not just serve them? So there's a lot of ways that I think this incarnational space could play out and challenge us into think. So I'm going to give you all a couple of minutes, and let you work through some of these questions, and then we'll wrap up this session before we go to the next.